there were some battles that had to be fought. There were some troubles that tried us. There were those who denied us. There were some burdens that broke us, and there were some cares that choked us. There were some people who bruised us, and there were others who misused us. But when we look back over it, we can say, through it all, I made it because the Lord helped me make it, and I ought to be glad about it. For many of us, the year was so difficult that we sounded just like the Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, and beginning at verse number 8, when Paul wrote to the children of God, we are troubled on every side, yet we are not distressed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. We are persecuted, but not forsaken. We are cast down, but not destroyed. In other words, you went through a lot last year, and with all that you went through, you're here today because you made it, and you ought to be glad about it. If we were completely honest with ourselves, my brothers and my sisters, none of us would be able to say for certain exactly what we did to make it. None of us really know the true essence of exactly how we made it. There's nothing that we can really pinpoint. There's nothing that we can say we did for sure as the reason or the means by which we made it. But I believe that our making it to 2013 is similar to how the wounded man in the story made it on his journey. When we look at the parable of the Good Samaritan, it's because for everybody that came by you by chance, God sent somebody by charge. When you look at this particular parable, you're looking at someone who suffered a great misfortune in life. You're looking at someone who was done wrong, who did not provoke the wrong that was done to him. You're looking at somebody who was minding their own business. You're looking at somebody who wasn't bothering anybody, and he wasn't going to bother anybody. He was just trying to get where he was trying to go. And that's all of us are trying to do on this journey. We're just trying to get where we're trying to go. We're just trying to get from where we are to where we need to be. We don't want to bother nobody. We don't want to cause no trouble. We just trying to make it on this road of life. But the reason why we're going to make it is because we cannot confuse those who passed us up by chance with those who are coming with a charge. Let's look at the story. The Bible indicates here in our text in Luke chapter 10 and beginning at verse number 30, as Jesus here helps the people who are listening to him, that a certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves, which stripped him of his raiment and wounded him and departed, leaving him half dead. And by chance there came down a certain priest that way, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. We'll get to that in a minute. Some folk will pass you by on the other side, the Bible says. And likewise a Levite, when he was at the very place where the man was, the Bible says he was a nosy fella, because he came and looked on him, but then he passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion on him and went to him and bound up his wounds and poured in oil and wine, set him on his own beast and brought him to an inn and took care of him. On the morrow he told the host, after he had already gave him 2 pence, that if he wanted him to take care of him, and if he owed him anything more, he would give it to him when he came back that way. When you look at this story contextually, you will notice that the Lord told this story in order to answer a question that a lawyer asked him. The lawyer wanted to know, who is my neighbor? Hello up in here. The lawyer asked asked this question not because he was really seeking an answer to the question, but the Bible says in verse number 29 that he was willing to justify himself. He had already had some actions of his that he had taken part in, and he wanted to justify his actions, and that's why he asked Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" See, the Jews had taught and had practiced the religion of do to thy fellow Jew what your fellow Jew would do unto you. And because of this teaching and because of this belief system, they would only help other Jews because they figured that the Jews only were their neighbor. And the Lord is going to reach into the heart of their hypocrisy and show them emphatically that there are times and there are occasions where Jews neglect to help other Jews. It depends on what's going on in their life as to whether or not they will take the time to help you get where you're trying to go. Come on in the room here. And so when he asked the question, "Who is my neighbor?" the Lord wanted to show him that your neighbor is anybody who will take time to help you get where you're trying to go. Come on up in the room here. Your neighbor, the one you can count on, might not be the one that you're looking at. It might not be the one that you're calling. It might not be the one that you're depending on, but it's something about knowing that God guides the very threads of your life that will help you understand that there are some folk who come into your life by chance, and there's other folk that come into your life by charge. These are the central focal points of this message this morning. Because if we're going to make 2013 better than 2012, we cannot confuse the chance folk with the charge folk. Come on in the room. You got folk who come into your life and all God intends for them to do is pass by on the other side. Yes, ma'am, and yes, sir. That's all they're supposed to do. Sometimes we get all upset and we get all beside ourselves because they passed by on the other side. That's all they were supposed to do. And if you have misunderstood God's purpose for your life, chances are you put your trust in some chance folk rather than depending on some folk who got a charge from God. Let's look at the story. Let's notice the man. We're introduced to the man in verse number 30 when Jesus says a certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho. Obviously, this man was of Jewish descent because Jerusalem was in fact the place of worship. God had established a long time ago that his people could only worship where he had recorded his name. He recorded his name in the city of Jerusalem. And if an individual was going to worship God, they had to worship God where God had put his name. And since his name was in Jerusalem, in order to worship, the man had to come to Jerusalem. The Bible says he was coming down from Jerusalem and going into the city of Jericho. Jericho was a common route for those who resided in this city of palm trees. It was the